The Chronos Archive was not a place, it was a sigh. To the outside world, it was merely a dusty antique shop on the edge of Havenwood's cold docks. A block of crumbling Gothic architecture eaten away by sea salt and neglect. But for Kael Thorne, 32, and those obsessed with magical power, the archive was the central clearinghouse of the occult underworld, a vast dumping ground for cursed relics and deadly commodities. Kael was a fixer, an unofficial but vital title meaning he was the only one weary and skilled enough to clean up the magical messes others created. He didn't enjoy the job. He hated the smell of old brass, sulfur, and the fear that clung to every artifact. He hated the irredeemable amorality of those he served. But he was one of the few who could distinguish a fake good luck charm from a genuine curse capable of leveling a neighborhood. And the archive's existence required the stability only his cynicism could provide. That afternoon, the Havenwood sky hung a damp gray, the cold moisture seeping through the window cracks. Kael stood in the locked back room, where the air was so thick it was almost tangible. He was inspecting a new shipment, black pixie dust. Black pixie dust wasn't a drug, though its effects, a temporary, massive boost to the user's magical capacity, at the cost of irreversible mental and physical decay, made it far more dangerous. It was harvested from dead pixie fields, places where magic had become corrupted and rotten. Kael wore thick leather gloves, carefully opening the lead-lined iron box secured with a weakening seal. As the lid lifted, a surge of cold spread out. Not physical cold, but the chill of spiritual erosion. The fine, pitch-black dust shimmered like crushed coal, emitting a toxic magical energy that stank of rusted metal and sickly sweetness. He leaned close, engaging his innate ability, magical resonance sense, a sixth sense that allowed him to perceive the energy structure of objects. To Kael's sight, the black pixie dust wasn't powder, but a dark purple cloud, twitching and screaming. He felt a craving energy, a violent impulse to possess and corrode his own magic. He quickly slammed the box shut and relocked the latch. "This batch is worse than the last, Silas," Kael muttered, his voice raw. "It's almost self-destructing magic. Selling this will collapse at least 3 low-level magic networks in the city." The antique desk phone, sealed against unauthorized calls, rang 3 short bursts. Kael picked up. "Archive," he stated simply. "Fixer Thorne, I have a problem," stammered a voice on the other end. It was Valerius, a foolish small-time investor who thought he could trade magical artifacts without understanding their nature. "The amulet I bought last week, the one with the triumvirate protection runes, it's melting." Kael rubbed his temple. "Valerius, you used it to block a 5th-level spell without recharging it. I warned you." "No, I mean it's literally liquefying. And the color, it's turning pale blue. I think it's a fake. You have to verify it for me, quickly." Kael sighed. The supposed triumvirate protection amulet was merely a brass trinket with temporary magical charge. This was his daily grind, dealing with user incompetence. He was too tired to care about the ethics of selling junk. Still, he agreed to verify it the next morning. He hung up and turned back to the box of black pixie dust. This was Kael's constant internal struggle. He hated the chaos, yet he was bound to it. Not by loyalty to the archive, but by fear of what would happen without him to hold the last defensive line. The underworld would tear itself apart, and Havenwood would become a pile of magical ash. The archive's main door, usually equipped with a layer of charms to deter the bothersome, was suddenly breached. Not by violence, but by sheer haste. A young woman, Elara, a known potion witch with influence in the docks district, scrambled into the shop. She nearly tripped over a faded magical Persian rug. Her face was pale beneath her eccentric green makeup. "Kael, you have to listen to me," Elara gasped, clutching his leather jacket sleeve. The scent of burnt herbs and chemicals emanated from her. "You have to tell Silas. This isn't just about trade anymore." Kael maintained his composure. "Calm down, Elara. What is it? Is the Manticore Syndicate fighting over the docks again?" Elara shook her head violently. "No. Much bigger. The rumors, The rumors about the Chronos Key have crossed the line. They aren't just whispers in underground dens anymore. Kael frowned. The Chronos Key. A myth. It was said not to be a physical key, but a theoretical tool, a method to unlock or manipulate the constants of time and space. If true, it was ultimate power, enough to unmake and rewrite reality. It was the nightmare every fixer hoped never to confront. The key is a fairy tale, Elara. A story told to trick fools into paying too much for cheap relics. Kael said coldly, though he felt a chill tighten in his chest. Not this time. Orpheus is interested. At that name, Kael felt a sickening jolt run down his spine. Orpheus, the most ruthless and cunning shadow broker in the magical circle. A demon who dealt not in fire or scepters, but in information and manipulation. He cared nothing for money or territory. He only cared for absolute knowledge and power. Orpheus is hunting, and people believe. Elara lowered her voice, her eyes scanning the archive shelves stacked with cursed items. They believe the archive holds a clue or is the starting point for that hunt. Elara took a step back, her panicked eyes sweeping over Kael one last time. He won't stop. He will grind Havenwood to dust just to find a shred of information. You and Silas, you are targets. She spun around and disappeared quickly through the door, leaving behind a fading trail of panicked energy. Kael stood silently in the cold back room. He raised a hand to his temple. A brutal headache began to pound. It wasn't a normal headache. It was the city's magical resonance being agitated, like an enormous guitar string that someone had harshly plucked. Kael felt hundreds, thousands of Havenwood's faint magical currents twitching in fear, reacting to the emergence of a threat large enough to change the rules of the game. The archive had become a target. Orpheus had arrived, and Kael, who only wanted a weary but stable life, knew the days of dealing solely with fake protection amulets were over. He had been dragged into the fight. Kael didn't waste a second. He walked straight into the foundry behind the archive. Silas's forge was a world away from the dusty, chaotic facade of the shop. The air here was heavy with the smell of molten metal, grease, and raw magic. Silas wasn't just a blacksmith. He was a magical metallurgist, capable of forging weapons resistant even to ancient spells. Silas, around 60, built like a fortress, was working at the forge. A blue-purple flame burned beneath the sledgehammer. He was a daunting man with the cold eyes of someone who had witnessed too much carnage and feared nothing anymore. "We have an uninvited guest," Kael said, trying to keep his tone level. Silas didn't turn around. "I smell fear. It doesn't mix well with the scent of metal." Elara came. "The rumors about the Chronos Key are out. And more importantly, Orpheus is hunting it. Elara thinks the archive is the target." The only sound in the forge was the wheezing of the bellows and the hiss of metal being cooled. Finally, Silas stopped, but kept his back to Kael. "I know nothing of this so-called key," Silas replied, his voice sharp as a freshly honed blade. "And if that man is looking for it, we will lock down, seal up, and wait for him to grow bored. That is how the archive survives." Kael stepped closer. Waiting is not a strategy when dealing with Orpheus. He's not a relic hunter. He's a chaos hunter. You have to tell me. Why would he think the archive is involved? What have you kept here? Silas turned around angrily. He intended to push Kael away, but instead of using his hands, he used a touch of raw magical displacement to shift the heavy sledgehammer aside. That was when Kael saw it. The instant Silas's arm lifted due to the sudden movement, a chain of scorched runes was etched deep into the skin of his wrist. It wasn't a tattoo or an old scar. It was a magical brand, permanently seared, looking like glowing embers pressed into the skin. The runes formed a complex, distorted symbol sequence, as if they were carved in intense agony. "What is that?" Kael asked, his voice suddenly cold and repressed. Silas quickly pulled his sleeve down, but it was too late. A flicker of dismay, almost fear, crossed his hardened face, a rare sight. "It doesn't concern you," Silas growled. "It does, if it's Orpheus's mark," Kael retorted. He had heard the whispers about how Orpheus branded his victims. turning them into invisible puppets or locked information caches. That's Orpheus, isn't it? Those runes were left by him. Silence engulfed the forge. Silas finally released the hammer. Yes, he said, his voice almost a hateful whisper. That's why I forbade you from learning about him. He is not a normal monster. He is a mind manipulator, a master of psychic magic. I crossed paths with him decades ago. He doesn't hunt with spells. He hunts by finding your weakness, Kael. Silas stepped forward, looking straight into Kael's eyes. He knows the archive is valuable, and he knows my weakness is caution and reclusion. But your weakness, Kael? It's the people you try to protect. Any interference in his hunt for the key means a death sentence, not just for you, but for anyone you care about. Silas strictly forbade Kael from interfering. But for Kael, seeing the physical proof of Orpheus's cruelty on his uncle, a man who rarely showed emotion, he understood that this danger had become personal. Kael ignored Silas's warning. His uncle's words only emphasized one thing. Orpheus didn't play by the rules. If the archive was the target, everyone Kael protected was in danger. Kael went looking for Elara. Elara was the old blind seer. She lived in a small apartment above a bakery near the docks. Elara had long lost her physical sight, but she could see currents of time and magical potential like flowing rivers of light. She was one of the few Kael truly trusted and valued. She was the only one who saw past his exhaustion to the sliver of morality that remained. When Kael arrived at her apartment, the door was unlocked. Everything in the apartment was in its place. The herbal tea cups, the rune-woven shawl, the old leather-bound books. There was no sign of violence, no overturned furniture. But Kael immediately sensed something was wrong. The silence was not the silence of absence. It was the silence of violation. Kael subtly activated his resonance sense. The air held a cold and sharp magical scent, like frost on steel. It was Orpheus's magical signature. He left no heat, only cold emptiness. Orpheus hadn't attacked the archive. He had gone straight for Kael's weakness. He believed Elara, with her ability to see through time, held or knew the location of the Chronos Key. Kael found a piece of coarse cloth smeared with blood near the window. Not much blood, but enough to confirm Elara had struggled. Then he saw the message. Etched deep into the old wooden wall was a runic signature, not ink, but a chilling magical carving. The content was simple, yet terrifying. The Weeping Catacombs. The Weeping Catacombs was a vast and terrifying labyrinth of ancient tombs built beneath Havenwood, the burial site of ancient monks, and riddled with malicious, undeactivated magical traps. It was a place even fixers avoided. Kael returned to the archive. Silas was in the forge, continuing his work as if nothing had happened. He took Elara, Kael stated, the restraint in his voice about to break. Silas looked up. I warned you not to interfere. He exploited your foolish loyalty. I have to go. He took her to the catacombs. Silas threw the hammer onto the floor, creating a jarring sound. You can't. The catacombs is a death trap. He is waiting for you. You are a fixer, Kael. You know the rules. Never risk your own life for an informant. It is not business. Kael walked to the door, retrieving his favorite sealed shotgun, a weapon that fired not lead, but condensed magical energy. This time, it's not business, Kael said, and he left the archive. Kael found his way into the catacombs through a crumbling sewer pipe known only to the underworld. Inside the catacombs, the air was damp and icy, heavy with the stench of sulfur, mold, and death. The maze was a network of narrow stone corridors, filled with sealed tombs. To survive, Kael intensely activated his innate ability, magical resonance sense. He didn't just see with his eyes. The physical world receded into a gray blur, but the magical world shone brightly and dangerously. In his resonance sight, he saw ancient green energy streams, remnants of repulsion traps sealed centuries ago. Orpheus's new and sharp energy footprints, like a cold silver thread leading through the maze. Charmed walls, where magic was compressed to the point of near explosion. This ability saved his life. He saw a network of faint yellow light interwoven on the stone floor ahead, a pressure rune trap. Just one false step and the magical force would tear him apart. Kael dodged, crawling through a gap in the wall. Orpheus's energy trail led him deeper, past unlit burial chambers. Finally, he entered a large crypt, apparently an ancient monastic altar. In the center of the room, Elara was tightly bound to a cold stone altar. She looked weak and exhausted, but was alive. Surrounding her was a complex network of protective traps, a combination of ancient locking runes and Orpheus's new manipulative magic. Kael drew a rune-carved knife, designed for dismantling magical links. He crouched low, focusing all his resonance energy on neutralizing each energy thread one by one. It was a race against time, and he knew he was being watched. As he undid the final link, a chilling laugh echoed from the shadows of the room. It was a smooth yet sharp sound, like breaking glass. "I knew you would come, Kael Thorne." Orpheus's voice resonated, coming from no specific direction. Kael couldn't see Orpheus in full. He did not step into the light, leaving only the impression of a cunning shadow and supreme power. "What do you think of my little gift? I knew your loyalty was a rare antique, and I knew this woman was the last thread holding you to humanity." Kael didn't reply. He finished neutralizing the trap and lifted Elara onto his back. She was impossibly light. "Let her go, Orpheus. This is between you and me." "Oh no, Kael." The laughter echoed again. "You brought this trouble upon yourself the moment you decided to protect that dilapidated antique shop. You may take her. I have already extracted what I need, and I will take back what I want by crushing the things you care about." Kael carried Elara, fleeing the catacombs through a small, hidden emergency exit. Behind them, Orpheus's laughter still echoed, accompanied by a warning. "The game has just begun, Fixer." They escaped, scrambling through bones and mud. Kael brought the injured, exhausted but safe Elara back to the archive. She was taken upstairs and treated by Lyra, who had returned when she learned of Kael's action. Kael returned to the forge. Silas was waiting for him. Kael recounted the brief confrontation, admitting that Orpheus had seen his weakness and used it effectively. Silas listened, his eyes holding not the anger or reproach Kael expected, but a cold respect. Silas realized his nephew, whom he thought was too tired to care about anyone but himself, had taken the greatest risk for another person. Kael had proven he was not a dispassionate fixer. He was a guardian. Silas said nothing about loyalty. Instead, he walked to a hidden corner of the forge, where an ancient control panel, resembling a stone altar, was located. He placed his hands on it and channeled his cold, powerful magical energy into the etchings. An ancient screech resonated throughout the archive. The main door of the antique shop slammed shut with magical force. Cold blue defensive runes covered the window frames and roof, flickering intensely. A series of physical bolts and magical barriers activated, transforming the archive from a secret black market into a nearly impenetrable fortress. This was the emergency defense system Silas had forged years ago, and it had never been used. "I told you it wasn't business," Silas said, his voice deeper now. "But if he wants to turn the archive into a battlefield, then we will show him what business is." He looked at Kael, who was leaning wearily against the door frame. "I don't know what Elara told him, or what he took, but now he knows we will fight. Prepare, Kael. He is coming, and he won't come alone." Though the Chronos Key remained missing, Kael had sent a clear message to the ruthless shadow broker. He would not back down. Life at the Chronos Archive was still dark and full of risk, but Kael, now a fixer with principles, had embraced his role. He would protect those he cared about, no matter the cost. Kael led Elara back to the small apartment above the archive, where the scent of herbal tea and aged paper still lingered, chasing away the damp mildew and sulfurous smell of the catacombs. Silas had activated the exterior wards, turning the ground floor into a silent block of metal and magic, but Kael still felt acutely unsafe. Elara lay on the worn bed, her face pale, yet her eyes, though sightless, fixed on Kael with an unnerving intensity. Kael gently wiped the wound on her arm, realizing Orpheus hadn't used brute force, but magic designed to drain vitality and memory. He tried to take what I saw, Elara whispered, her voice raw. He wants the final piece. Kael applied a poultice soaked in soothing herbs to her cut. What piece, Elara? What is the key? She closed her eyes. It is not metal, Kael. It is not an incantation. People assume the key is an artifact they can hold, a tool to unlock time. But Chronos does not grant that power to any static object. Kael felt his own magical headache return. The entire underworld had turned the city upside down searching for something that didn't exist? Then what is it? Kael urged. It is resonance. A codified concept. Or perhaps a person. Elara gasped for breath. Orpheus does not want to open time. He wants to rewrite it. He needs someone capable of sensing and harmonizing with the flow. Someone with powerful resonance, untainted by their own cynicism and hatred. She grabbed Kael's hand, the frailty gone from her voice, replaced by an urgent warning. He saw the kindness in you, Kael. He saw the reason you risked your life for me. That is what he wants. He believes the key is very close to him now. Kael recoiled, a chill running down his spine. Elara was not just warning him about the siege of the archive. She was implying that he, Kael Thorne, was somehow the focal point of the entire hunt. Kael descended into the smithy. The heat of the forge was insufficient to drive the cold from his bones. Silas was grinding a long metal bar, sparks of raw magic flying in the still air. Kael didn't mince words. Tell me about the charred rune. Silas stopped working. The only sound was a small hammer dropping heavily onto the metallic floor. He did not look at Kael, remaining focused on the unfinished blade. That is not your story, Silas said flatly. It became my story when he captured Elara. Kael retorted, his exhaustion giving way to sharp anger. You said Orpheus is dangerous, that he isn't a typical monster. I need to know what he is so I can defend the archive. And I need to know what those runes are. Silas sighed, a sound like grinding rust. He lifted the hot metal from the forge, and the orange glow clearly illuminated the deep scar on his wrist, looking as if someone had used a searing brand to carve ancient script into his flesh. It is the mark of failure, Silas conceded, his voice low, a rare display of weakness. A failure of faith. Silas recounted that decades ago, he had been more than a simple blacksmith, he was a forger. He created the grandest artifacts, items that could contain and magnify power. Orpheus, then known as Elara, was his rival and sometimes colleague in the study of archaic magic. Elara was no combat mage. He was a chronographer, obsessed with the relativity of truth and memory. He did not crave gold or territorial power, Silas explained. He wanted absolute control over perception. If he could change what others remembered, he could change how they acted. He could rewrite history without a time machine. The scar was the result of a collapsing bargain. Elara had attempted to steal Silas's memories and forging skills, but Silas had resisted. The price of failing to fool him was being spiritually tethered to him forever. Whenever he uses that manipulative magic, this scar burns, Silas said, clenching his hand. Orpheus is not hunting talismans. He hunts well. Silas finally turned to face Kael, his eyes iron cold. And he saw your unbreakable will when you ran into the catacombs. He saw that you care for others. He will use that. He will not kill you. He will make you the key, Kael. The danger was clearly defined. Orpheus did not want Kael dead. He wanted to break Kael's spirit and use him as a tool to access or become the Chronos Key. So what must I do? Stop caring. Kael scoffed, his voice bitter. Silas shook his head. Impossible. But you can dull your resonance. Silas placed a thick leather glove on the forging table. It looked ordinary, but when Kael touched it, he felt a jolt of cold energy running beneath the surface. I made it from a mixture of Chronos alloy and strands of Elara's hair. I call it the resonance dampener, Silas explained. It won't negate your innate ability, but it will stabilize it. It will prevent Orpheus from using the city's inherent resonance to transmit his emotions or read yours. Kael slipped the glove on. The effect was almost immediate. The constant hum, the magical whispers of Havenwood, diminished significantly. It was a relief, but also a severing. Kael felt as if he had lost a sense. This is physical protection against mental manipulation, Silas continued. But you also need spiritual protection. Kael, you must stop trusting the authenticity of what you feel. This was the hardest warning. Kael had always relied on his ability to sense magic to distinguish truth from falsehood, good from evil. Silas was asking him to become suspicious of his own nature. When he acts, he will not attack the door. He will attack your mind. He will make you see Elara dying or me betraying you. You must know those emotions are counterfeit. They are emotional blades forged by Orpheus. You must cultivate doubt as a form of armor. Kael tightened his fist, feeling the cold safeguard of the dampener. He had accepted the role, but the price was not just combat. It was losing a part of himself. As night fell, the silence in the archive became taut with tension. Kael sat at the counter, the sealed shotgun resting on the mahogany, the resonance dampener on his other hand. The shop was dimly lit by the blue glow of the defensive runes. Exactly at midnight, everything vibrated. It was not a physical explosion, but a pure resonant shockwave. It struck the archive, not to crumble the walls, but to overload the magical wards. Kael felt Silas's defensive runes groan under the pressure. The shockwave carried a potent sensation, a flood of toxic, hyper-focused magic, pure terror, mixed with a feeling of irreparable loss. For an instant, Kael saw the illusion. Silas drained in the forge, Elara turning to dust. Panic surged, but the dampener held. It didn't stop the fear, but it reduced its intensity to a manageable level. Kael recognized this as Orpheus's first probing strike, testing their psychological armor. Silas instantly emerged from the basement, his face strained beneath the magical lights. The bastard! Silas roared, the scar on his wrist lightly smoking. He's trying to burn out the defenses from the inside. The shockwave lasted less than 30 seconds, but felt eternal. When it subsided, silence returned. The shop stood firm. Silas's wards had endured. Kael cautiously moved to the front door, checking the locks. Everything seemed intact, save for one object. Lying on the exterior step, just outside the physical ward's reach, was a fragment. It was a shard of a small, ancient mirror. No bigger than a coin. It radiated a cold, faint magical mist, and Kael could feel Orpheus's residual energy clinging to it. The mirror reflected nothing but the blackness of the night. Silas looked at the shard, his eyes narrowing with hatred. That's his signature. He is telling us he saw us. He saw our defiance, and he will break us, piece by piece. Kael picked up the shard with his gloved hand. The fear had receded, but the resolve had not. He now understood the rules of the game. This wasn't a fight of fire and metal, but one of truth and will. He knows we are here, and he knows I am the target. Kael said, his voice firm. Then we won't wait for him to break in. If I am the key, I won't let him unlock it. Dawn filtered through the rune-guarded slits, bathing the archive in a dull, gray-gold light. Kael and Silas had spent the night awake, reinforcing cracks and recharging wards. We cannot sustain many more attacks like that, Silas admitted. He doesn't have to break in if he can simply overload our power source. We need a counterplan. Kael looked at the dampener on his hand. It had protected him from manipulation, but it also slowed him down. If the key was a person or a concept, and if Elara said it was very close, Kael had to act fast before Orpheus reached the same conclusion. Elara said the key is not an object. Kael said, turning to Silas. You are a forger. You know more than anyone how great magical objects are created and function. If the key is resonance, it must have an origin point. Somewhere in this city encoded the very idea of the key before it was translated into a person or object. Silas considered this, stroking his scar. There is only one place. The original guardians of Chronos built a foundation, a magical anchor point to stabilize the time flow within the city. They used it to ward off the chaos of raw magic. Where? Kael asked. The heart of Havenwood. The grand clockwork. A political symbol, but underneath, an ancient magical altar. If the key has a physical codex, it must be there. but it is heavily guarded and protected by runes older than me. Kael nodded. The archive had become a cage. Kael had to leave and change the script. I will go to the Grand Clockwork, Kael declared. I will find that anchor point. If I can't stop him from getting the key, I will neutralize the place he needs to use it. Silas did not object. He simply handed Kael a small, sharp dagger, its blade covered in magic-absorbing runes. Take this. It doesn't just cut. It will overload and shatter any complex ward. Be quick, Kael. Orpheus does not like playing defense. Once he realizes you have escaped, he will throw his full weight at the archive. Kael clipped the dagger to his belt, feeling the weight of the dampener and his responsibility. From a cynical fixer, Kael Thorne had become a resolute shield. He left the archive, stepping out into the fading light of Havenwood, heading toward the city center. The coming confrontation would not just be a brawl, it was a race against time and truth. Kael did not linger long in the cold forge after the tense confrontation with Silas. Though his uncle had forbidden it, warning him about Orpheus and hinting that the hunt for the key was a death trap, Kael couldn't shake the growing sense of dread in his gut. He knew Silas hadn't lied about the danger, but the warning only amplified Kael's suspicion. If the threat was so massive, why was Silas so dismissive, focused only on safeguarding the archive? He decided to make a quick visit to Elara. It was usually more ritual than duty, a moment of quiet amid the daily chaos of his fixer work. Elara's apartment was situated above an old tailor shop 2 blocks from the archive, a small space that was always warm and smelled of dried mint, burning incense, and beeswax. When Kael stepped through the unlocked door, he instantly registered the unnatural silence. Elara was always present, even when sleeping. Though blind, she was a center of static energy, her clouded white eyes seeing things the ordinary could not. But the room was empty now. Her favorite wicker chair was vacant. The hand-woven rug before the old fireplace was still warm, but her magical presence was gone. Kael's worry morphed into an arcane chill. He saw no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no cracks in the crude protective runes she'd drawn on the threshold. This was the worst sign. A common thief left chaos. This was a clean, silent abduction. Only someone immensely powerful could manage it without a sound. Kael lightly activated his arcane resonance sense. The world echoed beneath his fingers. The ability points out cracks, residual energy imprints. Here, it pointed to something cold and sharp, outside the bounds of natural magic. It was a psychic, not physical, odor, the scent of Orpheus. Metal, cold sulfur, and a sickeningly sweet perfume like mold growing on gold. Kael recognized the signature from old cases. It was the essence of a mind manipulator, a ghost wearing human skin. Orpheus hadn't used violence. He used words, or fear. He had displaced Elara as if she were a piece of furniture. Kael's jaw clenched. Elara was the only person who never asked anything of him. The only one who saw Kaelin, not Kael the Fixer, the last protector of a dying archive. Orpheus knew that. He saw Kael's weakness and stabbed straight for it. Kael swept his eyes over the room, searching for any sign of resistance. He found it, not on the floor, but wedged in a tiny crack on Elara's herbal mixing altar. A piece of cloth, silk thin, with a small, dark, dried bloodstain. It wasn't hers. Its magical signature was different, stronger, and toxic. Perhaps one of Orpheus's minions, or him. The cloth was a secondary clue. Kael found the main message on the rough stone wall behind the fireplace. It wasn't writing. It was a deep carving, etched not by a blade but by energy. A rune signature, smoldering. The rune described an ancient symbol of confinement and decay. Beneath the symbol, a line etched in ancient magical script bore a single word, catacombs. Specifically, the Weeping Catacombs, a sealed-off section of the massive subterranean network beneath Havenwood. It was a burial place for the accursed, a labyrinth of bone and forgotten magical traps. A perfect place to hold a blind prophet and force her to reveal the location of the Chronos Key. Kael returned to the archive, rage blazing in his chest. He marched straight to the forge. Silas was examining a war hammer, the firelight casting red shadows on his rigid face. "You were right," Kael said, his voice cold as iron. Orpheus came. Silas stopped working, his eyes level and cold, asking no questions. Kael threw the bloody cloth onto the steel workbench. He took Elara. "She's in the Weeping Catacombs. He thinks she knows the key's location." Silas sighed, a heavy sound filled with weariness and disdain. "And what do you propose? Run straight into that trap?" "Kael, you are a fixer, not a knight in shining armor. Your job is to clean up the mess, not make yourself the bait." "She's the only one." Kael started, but Silas cut him off. "She is a prophet. She lives in danger. That was her choice. And that is the price of foolish loyalty," Silas growled, turning back to the hammer. "You know what Orpheus does? He doesn't just destroy the body, he destroys the mind. You will be compromised, manipulated, and forced to lead him right back to this archive. This is an attack on me, Kael, through your weakness. So you want me to leave her to die? I want you to act like what you were trained to be, a survivor. You've maintained your ethics in this world longer than anyone. Don't let a frivolous emotion destroy it all." Silas pointed to the rune scar on his wrist. "I made that mistake once. Orpheus is not worth your sacrifice." Silence filled the forge, smelling heavily of coal and past pain. Kael stared at Silas's scorched scar, physical proof of failure and bitterness. Silas might preach hatred for loyalty, but that scar told a different story, the price he paid trying to save someone. "She needs me," Kael said, his voice dropping, not in apology, but in resolution. "And Orpheus made a mistake. He made this personal." Silas put the hammer down, a slow, decisive action. He understood. Kael was no longer the tired merchant of the archive. He had become a protector. "If you go," Silas warned, "you will be ruined. And I will not risk the archive for your recklessness." Kael nodded. He went to his secure locker, a metal box sealed with 3 layers of different magic. He pulled out the necessities for high-level infiltration. First, he donned a thick leather coat lined with protective runes against chaos magic, the kind the catacombs seemed to attract. Next, his weapon. He chose a short-barreled shotgun, forged from magical steel alloy. This was no ordinary firearm. It was sealed, meaning each shell was charged not with gunpowder, but with a minor soul-rending enchantment. Kael loaded 6 hollow silver slugs, filled with holy salt and the ashes of an elder witch. It was heavy, bulky, and a clear statement. He wasn't coming to talk. Finally, he took out a pair of old goggles, fine-tuned to enhance his arcane resonance sense, allowing him to see energy flows in sharp detail. "I'll be back," Kael said, securing the shotgun to his hip. Silas turned his back to the forge, the firelight reflecting disappointment but also strange respect in his eyes. "If you don't return, I'll sell your assets and buy a better shipment of black fairy dust with the money. Remember that." Kael didn't answer. He strode out of the forge, through the dusty retail area of the Chronos Archive. He paused at the threshold, looking out at the cold port where the fog began to creep into the dark alleys. He turned his head, not toward Silas, but toward the room filled with dangerous relics, where his life had been trapped for so long. "This time," Kael declared, his voice ringing with new certainty, "it's not business." He stepped into the night, heading south, where the air began to carry the damp, ancient smell of tombs. Kael Thorne, 32 years old and bone-tired, ran a practiced hand over the latest consignment of dangerous magical relics. His everyday life was that of a fixer at the Chronos Archive, a dusty antique shop facade that hid a thriving black market for items that could break reality. The chilly air of the Havenwood docks clung to him, matching the cold skepticism he felt towards the murky morality of the underworld he served. He inspected a pouch of fresh black fairy dust, its toxic energy humming under his touch, before answering a call concerning a fraudulent protective amulet that needed urgent authentication. Kael lived in perpetual conflict. He despised this world, yet he was the only one capable of shielding it from its own inherent chaos. The tension ratcheted up when a frantic potion which burst through the door, not seeking a purchase, but delivering a grave warning. Rumors of the Chronos Key had spilled past the fringe, marking the archive as the prime target for those hunting ultimate power. Kael felt a jarring headache. The magical resonance of the city was being stirred violently. Kael sought out his uncle Silas in the cold smithy behind the shop, a space perpetually heavy with the smell of scorched metal and raw magic. Kael demanded an explanation regarding the Chronos Key and the new threats. Silas, a blacksmith whose reputation was as fearsome as his craft, initially refused, answering only with chilling warnings and contempt for Kael's curiosity. When Kael pressed the issue, Silas instinctively shifted a heavy hammer, momentarily pulling up his sleeve. Kael saw it. A chain of scorched runes burned deep into the flesh of Silas's forearm. This was the physical evidence of a past encounter with Orpheus, the ruthless shadow broker. The silence between them grew taut. Silas finally spoke, his voice sharp as steel, warning Kael that Orpheus was no mere monster but a master manipulator of the mind, and that any interference with his hunt for the key was a death sentence. Though Silas forbade him, Kael understood the danger was now profoundly personal and unavoidable. Kael's life fractured when he discovered that Elara, the elderly blind seer whom he trusted and valued, had vanished from her small dockside apartment. There were no signs of violence, only a lingering magical scent, cold and sharp, the signature of Orpheus. The shadow broker knew Kael's weakness. He believed Elara either possessed the key or knew its location. Kael found a bloodied scrap of cloth and a message etched into the wall in a signed rune. Elara was being held in the Weeping Catacombs, an ancient subterranean labyrinth beneath Havenwood, filled with the dead and forgotten magical traps. Silas attempted to physically restrain Kael, reminding him of their professionalism and the futility of loyalty in their world, but Kael had made his decision. With a sealed handgun tucked into his coat and a desperate reliance on his innate magic resonance sense, Kael left the archive, declaring, "This time, it's not business." Kael cinched the leather cord around his wrist, tightening the disassembler tools to his belt, and plunged into the cold darkness of the Weeping Catacombs. The entrance was a foul fissure hidden behind a forgotten cemetery on the edge of the docks. The moment Kael crossed the threshold, the air changed entirely. It was not just cold, but heavy, as if the atmosphere were composed of solidified fear and sulfur dust. The damp stench of rotting earth, stagnant water, and ancient decay made Kael gag. He closed his eyes. Navigating this environment visually was suicide. Kael concentrated, pushing his tired reserve of magical energy to the surface. He had used this ability thousands of times to verify artifact authenticity, but using it to navigate a maze riddled with lethal magic was an entirely different magnitude. A small, high-pitched whine sounded in Kael's head, and his visual world collapsed, replaced by a dazzling and dangerous network of energy. This was his magic resonance sense. The old stone walls appeared as a dull gray lattice, vibrating slowly. Dripping water was marked by pale green lines. Crucially, though, were the magical traces. Faint, fading yellow threads marked paths taken by predecessors centuries ago. But standing out starkly against that backdrop were cold, sharp streaks, almost a deep violet color. The energy signature of Orpheus and his immediate retinue. This trace didn't just show where he had walked, but how he had walked. A subtle psychic distortion, a hallmark of mental manipulation power. Kael began to move, slowly, every step meticulously calculated. He stopped abruptly. Before him, the stone floor looked normal, but under the resonance view, it was a patch of violently pulsating electric blue. This was an ancient pressure rune trap, sealed centuries ago and recently reactivated. Anyone stepping upon it would be instantaneously compressed into a bloody sheet of flesh. Orpheus's dark violet trace skimmed the very edge of the trap. He hadn't touched it. He knew exactly where it lay. Kael pulled out a small syringe containing a potent anti-magic chemical compound formulated by Silas. He knelt, nudging the tip into a minute crack at the trap's edge. The liquid bled into the stone, and in the resonance world, the searing electronic blue began to flicker, then winked out. The trap was neutralized, but Kael felt the magical exhaustion creep in, the cost of fixing at this level. The winding labyrinth brought Kael to a larger chamber where the air was thick with the scent of foul incense and electrical magic. In the center of the room, on an old gray stone altar, was Elara. She was bound not by physical chains, but by shimmering metal filaments, strands of magic woven from her own distress. Elara, though blind, was a powerful clairvoyant, and Orpheus had used her own visionary energy to create this prison. She was frail, her wrinkled skin pale in the weak light of Kael's oil lamp. A cold rage welled up in Kael as he saw her. Silas had been right. Loyalty was a weakness, and Orpheus had exploited it perfectly. Kael knelt. The trap was far more complex than anything he'd encountered in the archive. It wasn't a quick killer but a draining mechanism. A series of tiny runes carved into the pedestal were slowly siphoning Elara's life force and prophetic ability, converting it into something Orpheus could utilize. He began the meticulous work of disassembly. He couldn't use the anti-magic fluid here. It would kill Elara. He had to physically nullify each rune, using obsidian blades treated with neutralizing magic. It was a slow process, requiring absolute focus to avoid harming her. Poor Kael Thorne. A smooth, cold voice echoed, reverberating off the stone walls. It didn't come from a specific direction. It came from everywhere at once. Kael froze. He was here. Kael couldn't see Orpheus with his physical eyes, but in the resonance world, he was a massive, swirling cloud of abyssal black energy, standing on the border between shadow and light. It wasn't a body, but a pressure. You came precisely as predicted. Orpheus's voice continued, carrying a hint of mockery. Loyalty is not a virtue, Kael. It is a leash I find useful for leading the compliant dog. Kael continued his work, his obsidian blade scraping against a rune linked to Elara's wrist. What could you possibly use those for? You don't need her, you need what she knows. Clever, but I need both. Her foresight is an invaluable map, and your suffering is a currency I enjoy. Orpheus replied. Silas taught you professionalism, detachment. Yet you choose emotion. That is why the archive will fall, and why you will forever be a second-rate fixer. The pressure in the room intensified. Kael felt hundreds of unseen hands attempting to crush him. Orpheus's psychic spellcraft. Kael's resonance ability began to flicker, almost overloaded by the malevolent presence. Tell me where the key is, Kael, Orpheus commanded, his voice now sharp and demanding. Kael shook his head, never pausing his hand. If I knew, you'd have it. I never keep anything too hot. He neutralized the final rune. The binding magic vanished simultaneously. Elara gasped, slumping forward. Now, Kael muttered. He quickly hoisted Elara onto his back. She was alarmingly light, but still warm. Orpheus seemed momentarily thrown by Kael's decisiveness. His magical pressure immediately spiked, attempting to seal the exits. In the resonance world, the walls began to turn solid black, shuddering with energy. Kael bolted toward the emergency exit he had pre-located via resonance, a long sealed passage Silas had once mentioned. He drew his sealed handgun, loading a bullet etched with destruction runes. He fired. The sound in the catacombs was deafening. The projectile exploded, not with gunpowder, but with a release of condensed magical energy, tearing through the stone wall and the ancient seals. Dust and bone fragments sprayed everywhere. Kael didn't look back. He flung himself through the gap, scrambling over decades of decayed human remains and crumbling rock. He ran, carrying the seer, using his last reserves of strength. Just behind them, as they clawed their way out of the exit and into the cold Havenwood air, Orpheus's chilling laughter echoed up from the depths. You think you have one, Kael? You have only clarified the rules of the game. You chose to protect the weak. That makes you predictable. I will find you, and I will take what I want, fixer. Kael knew Orpheus would keep his promise. He could only tighten his grip on Elara and sprint back toward the archive. They had escaped, but they had brought the war home. Kael delivered an injured but safe Elara back to the Chronos Archive. He gave Silas a terse account of the confrontation, admitting that Orpheus had seen his weakness. Silas listened. Instead of fury or blame, a cold respect flickered in his eyes. Silas realized his nephew, whom he thought too weary to care, had risked everything for another person. Silas said nothing. He simply walked to the ancient control panel and began activating the emergency defense systems, a series of hidden bolts and layered protective runes. A cold blue magical light engulfed the shop. Silas was converting the archive into an impenetrable fortress, preparing for the inevitable siege. Though the key remained missing, Kael had sent a clear message to Orpheus. He would not yield. Life at the Chronos Archive was still dark and perilous, but Kael, now a fixer with principles, had fully accepted his role as protector of those few he held dear, regardless of the coming cost. Kael Thorne, 32 years old, pushed open the heavy door of the Chronos Archive. The familiar scent of aged leather, metallic dust, and sealed magic instantly wrapped around him, a cold embrace from the self-imposed prison he inhabited. Despite its dusty facade, the archive was a repository of chaos, Havenwood's most refined black market for magical artifacts capable of citywide destruction. Kael carried the deep-set fatigue of a man too familiar with the moral abyss. He was a fixer, the only person skilled and cynical enough to neutralize dangerous items before they fell into the hands of the power-hungry. Today was like any other. The cold port of Havenwood continually pumped the world's worst contraband into the archive. He was currently inspecting a new shipment, Black Moon Dust, a magical narcotic derived from fossilized cactus, infamous for inducing raving prophetic visions. Kael felt its sluggish, toxic energy beneath his fingertips. He hated the work, hated the nihilism it demanded, but knew if he didn't do it, someone far worse would take his place. His phone talisman buzzed. A fake protection amulet needed urgent authentication. A local noble had been conned and was nearing death believing in the worthless trinket. Kael sighed, ready to revert to his role as cynical moral consultant, when the main door burst open. A young potion witch, her face pale with fear, rushed inside. She wasn't a customer. She was a herald. Kael, listen, it's gone beyond the limits, her voice shook. The rumors about the Chronos Key have spread. Not just the small-time brokers. The big players. They say the key can control time, or at least bend it. Kael felt a grating headache. Not his usual migraine, but the magical resonance of the city itself being violently stirred. The archive, and everything it represented, was now the ultimate target. Chaos was coming. Kael left the cluttered counter and sought out his uncle, Silas, in the cold forgery workshop at the back. The air here was perpetually thick with sulfur, burning coal, and raw, unrefined magic, a stark contrast to the antique shop's quaint exterior. Silas, a fearsomely reputable smith specializing in magical tools and weaponry, was the only person Kael truly trusted. "Uncle," Kael called, his voice sharp with new danger. "I need to know about the Chronos Key. And what's happening?" Silas was absorbed in working on a bronze shield, thick with defensive runes. He didn't look up, replying with a frigid dismissal, the sound of his sledgehammer against metal echoing through the workshop. "Curiosity is a sickness, Kael. And around here, that sickness usually results in a quick death. Your job is to fix, not to inquire about things you cannot control." Kael slammed his fist onto a nearby workbench. "This isn't curiosity. It's Orpheus. He's hunting it. He'll grind Havenwood to dust to get that thing, and we are the only people standing in his way." Silas finally paused, his gaze as sharp as a dagger. He moved to angrily transition the heavy hammer out of his immediate grasp to talk. In that split second of movement, Kael saw it. A chain of scorched runes branded deep into the flesh of Silas's wrist, just beneath the edge of his leatherwork tunic. It wasn't a tattoo. It was a magical scar, an indelible mark of a past confrontation, burned by immensely potent psychic energy. Kael recognized it instantly. The calling card of Orpheus, the ruthless and insidious shadow broker, who manipulated not just the criminal underworld but the very fabric of the mind. Silence descended. Silas hadn't been fast enough to conceal it. "Listen to me, Kael." Silas finally spoke, his voice steel-cold but carrying a profound warning. "Orpheus is not a street mage. He is a hunter of minds. He knows exactly how to break wills, and he stops at no moral barrier. Any interference in his hunt for the key means a death sentence for everyone connected to the archive." Silas forbade Kael from interfering, but Kael looked at the chain of scorched runes and understood. This danger was no longer business. It was personal. Kael's life was torn apart that very evening. After temporarily locking down the workshop and attempting to dismiss the creeping dread of Orpheus, Kael returned to the small apartment of Elara, the elderly blind oracle. Elara was more than just his most reliable source of information. She was the only person Kael still considered family, outside of Silas. The apartment door was unlocked. When Kael stepped inside, he immediately felt the cold emptiness. The apartment was chillingly neat. The wicker chair where Elara usually sat knitting was vacant. There were no signs of violence, no disturbed belongings, but a residual scent lingered, cold and sharp, like crystallized magic. It was the scent of Orpheus. He didn't need to be violent. He knew Elara was Kael's weak spot. Orpheus believed that Elara, with her ability to perceive bent timelines, either held the Chronos Key or knew its location. Kael clenched his jaw. He wasn't after the key. He was going to use Elara to force Kael to reveal its location. Kael found a scrap of coarse, blood-stained fabric beneath the bed, Elara's blood, and carved onto the damp stone wall, not with pencil or charcoal, but with his signature sharp, cold rune script, was a message. Elara was being held in the Weeping Catacombs. The catacombs were an ancient subterranean maze beneath Havenwood, abandoned for centuries, filled with the remains of the dead and antique magical traps designed to keep buried secrets entombed. To enter was an act of suicide. Silas appeared behind Kael. He had felt the sudden, frantic shift in Kael's magical resonance. "You know it's a trap," Silas said, the usual sternness in his voice. "He planned this. He wants you to come. It's a professional decision. He's won a minor tactical advantage. Ignore Elara. Go back to work." Kael turned, his eyes holding none of their usual fatigue, only a cold fire. He unholstered his heavy, sealed pistol, checking the magically reinforced silver bullets. "Yes," Kael conceded. "He won this tactical advantage. But Elara isn't work. She's family." Kael walked out the door, leaving the heavy silence of Silas behind him. He declared with absolute resolve, his voice ringing in the cold port neighborhood. "This time, it's not business." Kael descended deep into the catacombs. The entrance was a fissure hidden behind an old storage bay, leading down a spiral staircase, choked with corrosion. The air below was humid, heavy with sulfur, mold, and centuries of decomposed death. This was the domain of abandoned souls and forgotten defensive traps. To survive, Kael activated his innate ability, a gift Silas had always tried to suppress, sensing magical resonance. To an ordinary person, the catacombs were absolute darkness. To Kael, the world transformed into a vibrant, dangerous network. Every residual flow of magic was illuminated. The faint green energy streams of sealed repulsion traps, the insidious purple energy footprints of Orpheus leading deeper into the maze, and pathways sealed by ancient incantations. He spotted a delicate rune line shimmering across the stone floor. If an ordinary person touched it, the pressure would trigger an antique rune trap. Kael stepped lightly over it, thankful for the skill that made him a curse decoder, a true fixer. He followed Orpheus's energy signature, navigating crumbling corridors filled with human bones. The sharp magical scent led Kael to a vast, deep central cavern, where the only light came from an ancient stone altar. Elara was tied securely to the altar. She looked frail and exhausted, but alive. A complex, amber-flashing magical net enveloped her. Kael began to dismantle the protective spell. He worked swiftly, his practiced hands peeling away energy knots, neutralizing each protective rune. Just as the final trap was deactivated, a cold, melodic, but utterly commanding laugh echoed from the surrounding shadows. "Excellent, Kael. I knew you would come." Orpheus had arrived. He wasn't physically present. Instead, Kael sensed only a cunning shadow, an entity that stirred his brain from a distance. Kael knew Orpheus was watching from another dimension, enjoying his fear and desperation. "You want the key. I don't have it," Kael growled, not looking up. "Oh, I know. But you are willing to do anything to protect the weak, and that is the truth I seek. I only need to push you hard enough, and then what you protect will automatically lead me to the destination." Kael had no time to confront him. He completed the trap neutralization, hoisting Elara onto his back. She was too light, bone-thin. Orpheus's laughter echoed, followed by a menacing warning, more potent than any spell. "You have brought trouble upon yourself, Kael, and I will take what I want. Wait and see. The Chronos Key will be mine." Kael ran. They burst out of the catacombs, scrambling through a narrow emergency exit choked with decaying bones. Kael returned to the archive, breathless and body aching, with Elara on his back. The smell of sulfur and death from the catacombs still clung to his leather coat. As soon as he gently placed Elara onto an armchair near the fireplace, Kael immediately checked her injuries. They were not physically severe, but the energy depletion was worrying. Silas stood at the entrance to the workshop, his expression still cold, but his silence carried an unusual pressure. Kael recounted the confrontation, omitting no details, especially how Orpheus had weaponized his loyalty. "He didn't need to torture her," Kael said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "He just needed her as bait. He saw it. He saw that my business rules collapse for one person. He knows, even if the key isn't here, that the archive, or I, am protecting it." Kael waited for an outburst, a lecture on the futility of emotion in the underworld. He had acted unprofessionally, risked everything for someone who, by archive standards, was a replaceable source of information. But Silas wasn't angry. Instead, a flash of cold, almost proud, respect flickered in his aged eyes. Silas recognized that his nephew, the man he thought too weary and jaded to care, had finally found a principle worth fighting for, a line he would not allow anyone to cross. "So he saw it," Silas repeated, his tone flat. He moved slowly forward, his steps heavy, stopping in front of Kael. "Good. At least we know what we're dealing with." He didn't rebuke Kael. Silas's silence spoke volumes more than any reprimand. It was an admission that Kael had officially entered the war, a war Silas had spent decades trying to avoid. "He will come," Silas stated, not as a question but a prophecy. "He knows we know he knows. The archive will be his first stop. You invited him." Silas turned his back, facing a stone wall behind the counter. With a decisive motion, he scraped away the old plaster and grime. Beneath it, an ancient control panel was revealed, carved from obsidian and dark bronze, riddled with levers and rune slots. This was no piece of technology. It was the defensive brain of the Chronos Archive, a magical artifact Silas had spent a lifetime maintaining and concealing. Kael had never seen Silas activate this system. Silas inserted a nickel-silver key into a central lock. He began to rotate the dials marked with dead languages. The metallic crunch of internal mechanisms sounded, followed by the hiss of ancient magic being released. A cold, blue magical light enveloped the shop. Initiating the archive's defenses was a terrifying process. Kael felt the archive's magical resonance surge around them. First came the shroud of obfuscation. Thin silver energy threads emanated from the walls, coiling together, wrapping the entire building. This shroud didn't just make the archive disappear from magical sight. It created a small chronal distortion field. Any sorcerer attempting to scry the future or past of this location would see only an indecipherable mess, neutralizing Orpheus's precognitive abilities. Next, Silas flipped a series of levers, activating physical and magical latches. The old wooden windows and doors were instantly sealed by wrought metal bars engraved with sealing runes, sinking deep into the stone walls like living metal snakes. The deep clunk, clunk, clunk of the obsidian locks resonated. These locks could not be destroyed by brute force. They could only be opened by specific magical codes. Silas moved to a larger slot and pulled a deep crimson gemstone from his robe. As he placed it into the slot, the stone pulsed with blinding light. It was the archive's power source, charged by an imprisoned elemental entity. "This is the chronal feedback loop," Silas explained, his voice slightly strained from the exertion. "It won't kill Orpheus, but it will stop him from using temporal and spatial trickery inside my shop. Anyone attempting to teleport into or out of here without my permission will be thrown back a few seconds. Enough time for me to react." Silas began pouring a ceremonially prepared metallic dust into the etched rune lines on the control panel. The scent of ozone and burning metal filled the air. He wields intellect and soul as a weapon, Kael observed, watching Silas's actions. "What do we do about that?" Silas paused, looking at Kael. "I can't seal his mind, Kael, but we can slow him down. We will make every step he takes expensive. I will make this place a magical trap, a magic box with no escape." "What is your job?" Kael understood his role. Silas handled the defenses. Kael was the enforcer, the one who would stand on the front lines. He went to his hidden cache, retrieving a lightweight leather vest densely layered with magical chainmail that Silas had forged for him over the years. He checked his sealed pistol and his magical decoding tools again. "My job is to protect those inside," Kael replied, tightening his weapon holster. The archive, in a matter of minutes, had transformed from a dusty antique shop into an impenetrable fortress, a sharp thorn forged of bronze and defiance. The blue magical light bathed the shelving, illuminating the dangerous artifacts. Kael looked at Elara, sleeping peacefully in the armchair, shielded by the layers of protection Silas had just activated. He looked at Silas, the fearsome blacksmith, now standing tall, ready for the final battle he had spent a lifetime delaying. Though the Chronos Key was still missing, Kael had sent a clear message to Orpheus. He would not yield. He was no longer a cynical fixer, but a guardian, the gatekeeper of what little loyalty remained in this decaying world. Life at the Chronos Archive remained dark and perilous, but Kael, now a fixer with principle, had accepted his role. He stood beside Silas, his gaze fixed on the sealed door, waiting.